Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to go through the worst books that I read or attempted to read this year. I was going to do my own video just to go through all the books that I DNF'd this year, but honestly there doesn't look like there's that much. And I also don't have all of the copies left. I did get rid of some of my books earlier this year, but we do have a big, massive stack right in front of me of all the books that I just felt like they were just bad. They were bad, or I just could not finish them for whatever reason. I'll try to make this video not the longest video on earth, but yeah, these are the worst books that I read or attempted to read. Okay, so the first one at the top here is this. This is The Prophet and the Idiot by Jonah Jonasson. I actually have another book of his, but it is a sequel, so I don't even have the first book. I got it in a charity shop. This one I got because it was satire and it sounded funny, and honestly, it starts off pretty decent. It really does. It's a very, very kooky and quirky. You have a bunch of characters that are kind of silly, and yeah, the basic premise of the book is the world is going to end. And it's like a lost family, or like it's like a found family type style book. There is definitely some characters that are smarter than others, but that kind of adds to its charm. And it says quite a lot about, you know, not really judging people on necessarily maybe their education and their merit, but maybe on other things. However, you get to the middle of the book and the rest of the book becomes incredibly political, to the point where, you know, you're meeting Obama and you're meeting all these other officials. I think this book is based in 2011. Yeah, 2011. So I just think that ultimately it wasn't for me, because I really hated the second part of the book, and I ended up giving this a 2-star. I genuinely enjoyed it. It was kind of hard. It is translated fiction. So, you know, Jonah Jonasson is, I believe, a Swedish author. So this is not in its native tongue, and maybe some of it gets lost in that respect when it is translated. However, I just think that I just don't know why he decided to change the book midway through, and the whole premise of the story pretty much changes. All right, next up we actually have a sequel. This is Shadow of Night. This is part of the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness. And the first book, which is A Discovery of Witches, I read last year, I want to say, and I gave that a 3 stars. I thought it was pretty mediocre. I thought it was really long and pretty mediocre, and I was kind of, you know, worried about going into this book, but I really generally liked what happens at the end of the first book, where, you know that they're going to be doing some time traveling and stuff. Ultimately, that is very like a sort of Twilight-esque retelling in a way, but for adults, because they're both like in their 30s, and it's just a witch and a vampire falling in love, and it's against the hierarchy of the world, and you know, there's some interesting stuff that happens in Discovery Witches, so that's why I, you know, wanted to read on, and I also bought the whole series, stupidly as that is. So I read this in August, and in August, I literally read 2 books, this and something else. This took me the whole month to read, and it was so boring. Like, I just found no interest in this book. They go back in time to maybe the 1700s, or I can't remember exactly, but back old school England, and we're meeting a lot of historical figures, very famous writers and creators and whatnot, talents that obviously in today's world, like, we cherish and love. Like, obviously, you know, there's like Shakespeare in here and stuff, but we're meeting them in this book, and it was just not for me. And it's so huge. I think that ultimately I don't really like their love story. I don't care for it, and I really don't like Matthew, who is the vampire and our main love interest and protagonist. I just find him to be quite controlling and rude, and also just old school. Like, he's, you know, I don't like the way that she was treated in this, in terms of like, you're a woman, you need to do that. That's just how things are. I didn't like that at all. And she's like a 30-something-year-old woman. She shouldn't be spoken to like that or treated that way. And she just kind of took a back seat, and I just found this book incredibly boring. And also at the end of the day, they went back in time trying to figure something out. I'm not going to give away the story, but like nothing really comes from it. And it also centers around the fact that they're trying to have a baby, or they want to have a baby, but they don't know if they can have a baby. And then he has a history because he used to have a woman and a child. And I didn't like it. So sorry, spoiler, if I just spoiled some stuff, but I do have the other books. It is a trilogy, but they also have a fourth book. I don't know what the fourth book is, but I do have the other 2 books, and I'm not sure what to do about that. I gave this a 2-star. Okay, this one is a more recent read. I read this month. We'll finish it this month. This is The List by Yomi Adegoke. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. So I'm rubbish at saying people's names, so please take that as you will. Anyway, this is written by a British journalist, and this is her debut fiction piece of work. And I thought it was going to be a little bit better than what it was. Honestly, I was generally enjoying the book up until we got to like 2/3, maybe not even 2/3. Like I think I enjoyed like 3/4 of this book, and then the last quarter of the book, it kind of just let me down. And I can see why suddenly, people were kind of not happy with how the book ended. And there is somewhat of a twist at the end, but at that point you have a sour taste in your mouth and you don't really care. So ultimately this is about a couple who are going to be married in like 30 days. And we find that the male in the relationship ends up on this list of abusers, and it's posted on Twitter. And obviously she's like, is this true? Is this not true? At the same time, she is somewhat of a feminist journalist. Like she writes about these things, and she goes, she's like a spokesperson for women who are victims of abuse and whatnot. And then she ultimately finds herself to be somewhat of a hypocrite if she stays with him, but at the same time she doesn't know if it's true. She doesn't know if she can trust him. And honestly, the whole book is just them going back and forth, and then every single chapter it's like 2 weeks to the wedding, 3 days to the wedding, and then the wedding, and then what happens. And I think the premise of the book was interesting, but the execution kind of let it down, and that's all I'll say. I mean, I gave it a 2-star. It's not something that I would recommend for people to read. I read it because I had bought it and I wanted to kind of get it off my shelves and like give it a go. So I have. I thought the writing was great. I think it was written really well. I just think the subject matter ultimately wasn't really of interest to me, especially with how it went. So that's a shame. Okay, next up is this one. This might be a surprise because I think a lot of people like this. So this is How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying by Django Wexler. So I thought the premise of this was great, and I do like video games and World of Warcraft, and this has tons of similarities to that. It's basically about our protagonist who wakes up. She keeps waking up on the same day in the same spot and dying and then coming back. It's like, obviously the ultimate like Groundhog Day scenario. And this whole time, every time she wakes up, she's given this quest. And so she decides, well, hang on a minute. I've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years now, or whatever, how long she's been doing it. So she decides to switch it up, and instead of being a good person in the story, she decides to try to be the Dark Lord. And so the whole book is her, getting her army together, going to this place where they sort of announce who the next Dark Lord is going to be. And I thought all of that was fine. Like that, I think the premise of this book is great and fun, and it's supposed to be funny and comical and satirical and whatnot. And it just ended up being a little too meta for me. It also had a lot of pop culture references, and I think it just tried ultimately too hard to have that voice. Like the character's voice was very, very like in your face all the time. And if you didn't quite enjoy the character, you wouldn't like this book. And I think ultimately she grated on me. I didn't really like her inner monologue or dialogue all the time. I think it was very repetitive, but I think in a book like this, you kind of run the risk of it being repetitive. I think ultimately, and I'm kind of going back on my words right now, but had it continued, like there's something that happens in this story where she ends up dying and dying and dying, but then like she starts succeeding and she doesn't die as much. And I think ultimately that's when the story got a little bit less interesting, because it didn't change, and it lost its momentum for me, and it lost its intrigue. Because yeah, I don't want to read about her doing the same thing over and over again, but it would have been more fun to read about her doing different things, different scenarios, and coming into different situations, and then eventually getting there. But I think it happened a little too soon in the story, or like in the book. And also the way it ended, it ends on a cliffhanger. It really doesn't have a conclusion at all, because obviously they want to have a second book, and I really didn't like the way it ended. I thought it was a non-ending. So yeah, I ended up giving it a 2-star. It just left a poor taste in my mouth after I read this. Okay, this again, I've seen some people like this book, so I feel bad, but this is My Roommate is a Vampire, and this is Jenna Levine. So, you know, this is not terrible, but I just don't like these types of books. I've realized these are the type of book where you can read it literally in one setting. You don't need a brain cell to read it. And honestly, no offense to anyone who likes this book or likes books like this, I generally thought that I would enjoy this more than I did. It just felt really incomplete to me. It didn't feel like it was a proper story, or it didn't have enough development. I also really didn't like the vampire. So the vampire is our love interest, and he is a little bit odd, and he's supposed to be like that because he's been asleep for like 100 years. So he wakes up and he doesn't know the modern world, right? So he's trying to learn that, and he wants a roommate. So he gets a roommate, and she ends up being the roommate. And, you know, he's like, oh yeah, don't come out at night because, you know, that's like I'm busy at night and stuff. And she's like, that's fine, I sleep at night, blah, blah. And she's just an idiot. I think it's just so obvious that something's weird is going on. And then like ultimately, like how it unfolds, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. It just fell flat. It fell flat, and I really didn't like his character. I found him to be very unsexy, and it never picked up for me. So yeah, I think I gave this like a 1-star. Okay, next up. I know a lot of people were very excited to read this. I have not read anything from S.T. Gibson before. I know A Dowry of Blood is like everyone's favorite book from last year, and I haven't read that book. So I did end up receiving this in Fairy Loot, and obviously I'd heard the author's name. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll read a book from them, see how I like the writing style. And this was so bad. This was so bad. I have seen that people kind of agree with me, but they also still liked A Dowry of Blood. I just feel so put off by having read this book and the way that it's written and what happens and just how poorly it's done, that I really have no interest in reading anything from this author. You would have to really twist my arm to read that book, although there is like a little bit of curiosity in my head where I'm thinking, well, I just might like it, you know, vampires, I might like it. It was just atrocious. It was just so badly written. The story, fine. It's not a story that I actually thought I was going into when I started reading this book. And then when I kind of figured out what was going on, I mean, it was fine, but it just was written so badly. And also I just really didn't like the characters. So this is basically a book about a throuple, but I think in a way, the way that it was written was just, it put a sour taste in my mouth when it came to like how the woman was treated in this situation. Because 2 men, and they had a previous relationship, and they were like the best of friends, and they also got like were lovers and together, and then they had a falling out, and one of them ended up marrying a woman who's in this story, and the 2 males don't really speak, but they are part of this secret society, and they still meet up every month or whatever, every week or whatever it is, I can't really recall, to talk about, you know, summoning and all this like dark stuff, which was interesting. And I wish that there was more of that in this book. Like there's literally one of the characters becomes possessed in this book, and he has like this evil spirit in him. But I think the book centered on the romance and their longing for each other, as opposed to the fact that one of them actually has a demon in them and is slowly probably going to die. Like there wasn't a lot of urgency towards what I would have thought would be the main point of the book. And I just thought this like hit the mark. It just wasn't for me. I wouldn't have minded the fact that it had all the romance and the throuple if it centered more or had more of the overarching thing about the secret society and the magic and the demons and all that. It just was like scattered around, but like very loosely. And there were some parts of the book where, you know, you're talking a lot about, because one of them's going to take over or thinks he's going to take over. And, you know, there's a lot of time spent on certain aspects of that. But then ultimately the book kind of forgets what it's supposed to be talking about, and it goes off into a different tangent. And I read the whole thing. I was thinking, this is gonna get better, but it just didn't get better. I gave it a 2-star. I didn't think the writing was very good either. So I was just very surprised by this. I don't know. But I have seen other people kind of say they didn't like it either. Okay, so the next book I actually don't have anymore, and it is Hooked. I don't remember the author's name, but I'll have a picture of it. So this one I ended up giving away to the free library that we have in our local area. And I gave this a 2-star. So this is like a dark romance. This is supposed to center around like Peter Pan, like a Peter Pan retelling. But literally it really isn't a retelling at all. It's just the characters in that book have names that are from the Peter Pan world, you know. But the actual like story of what happens really doesn't have, it's like so stretched that it's really not about Peter Pan retelling at all. And it was also like not about falling in love with Peter Pan, but falling in love with the Hook, like, you know, like Captain Hook and stuff. So it was fine, but it just centered quite a lot around the mafia and killing, and I don't really find that very sexy. Like when I'm reading a book and I know it's a dark romance, I think it's one thing when it's like vampires or there's some maybe I just like paranormal romance more than like mafia style romance, because this was more like mafia style and it just felt silly to me. It was a very easy book to read, but there's like tons of them in the series too. I can't remember. I think they're the I can't remember what the series is called, but there's a lot of them in this series. I just have the one and I ended up just getting rid of it and unholding it. I don't have any interest in reading the others, unfortunately, but I really do think this is one of the worst books that I read this year. All right, let's talk about some DNFs because I haven't really spoken about too many DNFs yet. So the first one is this. This is the Satsuma Complex by Bob Mortimer. This one I picked up on a whim. I don't know, I think it was one of my first book hauls that I did on my channel when I was like trying to get back into reading. I finally ended up trying to read it this year. And this actually starts off okay. It's about a guy who meets this woman in a bar, and then the next day he's told that his friend has been murdered, but he doesn't quite believe it, and he doesn't believe that these police people that come to his door are actually the police. So it's a little bit of a mystery, and then he goes and chases and he tries to find this woman and he finds her. And then I got to the point, and then I basically just stopped reading after that. Like I didn't find any interest in it. It's written in a way where I think this is more for a different demographic than I am, possibly someone older and possibly of a different gender. I just think that this doesn't have any interest to me, or it's just not the type of writing that I generally like. So I did end up DNFing this one. Okay, another book that I DNF'd is A Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel. So this one I had, you know, not any expectations of going into it or like liking it. This is from a Lumicrate, and with those books that I've been getting, I have since paused my Lumicrate because I realized I really wasn't liking a lot of the books, and I have like 12 books now that I haven't read, and I'm trying to read them just to see if I like them. But I did end up trying to read this sometime this year. I think it was in September time, and I was more of the subject matter that really upset me in this book. There is a disclaimer in the beginning which I did not read, so there is a warning or like a trigger warning or content. Yeah, it was a content warning of one of the chapters, and that's kind of ultimately why I didn't want to continue reading this. This has, I think, 2 or 3 parts to it. I read the first part, like you know how they have different parts in a book. So I read the whole first part and then I just DNF'd it. Ultimately, the content warning, had I read it, I would have probably gone into this a little wary and a little guarded, but I went into it without knowing what was going to be happening. And then what ended up happening was very upsetting to me. And I just didn't understand why so many people were raving about this book, because I saw a lot of people rave about this book online as I was reading it, and also after I had decided to DNF it. And it made me so angry. And then I realized, and I saw that there is a content warning. I was like, oh shoot, well, I should have read the content warning. But sometimes that gives you spoilers. So, you know, you never know. And also, I mean, not that much triggers me, but it was to do with like children, and I didn't like it. So this also was very confusing to me. It was very, very confusing to me. It is about mythology in the East, and I just didn't know. I don't know anything about Ganga. There's this big story, and I did kind of find myself struggling to know what we were going into and what the story was about. And I also didn't really like the writing style either. So there was quite a lot negative on this book, but ultimately it was what was happening in one of the chapters. And I was like, I can't believe I'm reading this. I can't believe it. But kudos. I mean, they did put a content warning. I just didn't read it. Okay, I do have 2 audiobooks that I have since DNF'd as well. So I tried to read Rhapsodic or listen to Rhapsodic by, I can't remember her name, but I will have the book here. And this was, I was kind of not triggered by this book, but I really didn't enjoy what was going on. It felt like there's a little bit of an age difference. And, you know, typically in romantasy, there's usually always a really big age gap. But in this one, it just bordered on like kind of gross to me. So it kind of goes back and forth in time. So as you start the book, you are 7 years later, but then you kind of go back to when the girl, the protagonist, is 16 years old and she meets the bargainer. And he's basically somebody who like gives people, like helps people out, or like bargains with them, gives them, like helps them with whatever issues. And it starts off pretty grim. I mean, she does end up murdering someone. So she like asks him to help her and stuff. But they had this it seemed like more of a grooming relationship than anything else. I really didn't like it. And I felt kind of gross by it. And it was also really, really repetitive. Like I've spoken about it quite a lot in my videos, so I don't want to like harp on too much, but I did end up just like I didn't finish this book because I really didn't like it at all. All right, this one I did read. This is A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. I told you I'm really bad with names. I'm so sorry. Okay, so this is one where I had high hopes for this one, to be fair. This is vampires, tea room. I thought it'd be cozy and fun. And it kind of had all of that, but it was just not fun. I think the problem with this book is it took itself too seriously. There were too many characters that it centered around, and it was trying to force these romances. And I feel like that would have been better spread out across different books, not all crammed into one book. It is quite a small book too. So I feel like there was just too much in this book for me to ultimately care. I mean, there's 5 characters in here that I'm supposed to care about. For one, like the first book of a series, I'm assuming this is going to be a series, I just didn't care. Also, I didn't think there was enough vampires in here for the book to be about a tea room in a vampire world where at night it turns into like this tea room for vampires, and then during the day it's like a normal tea. Like, I just found that to be really cool, but there wasn't enough of it in the book. So maybe ultimately the book's downfall was it wasn't long enough, which is usually generally not something that I say. It is just a little over 300 pages, so maybe it needed to be more fleshed out, or maybe I needed another book and to just stretch it out a little bit. I don't know. There was just something about it where I just didn't like the pacing. I didn't think the world was expanded on properly. And there's a little bit of a heist, but at the same time, at that point, I really didn't care about the characters. So, and then also like, there's a heist, and then after the heist, there's also a part of the book where I was just like, I was bored. It just didn't work for me. I think, yeah, it must have been pacing. Okay, this is a book that I did not finish. Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan. So this one I thought was going to be fun, but it really reminded me of How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying. Because basically she ends up in this world, this fantasy world of her favorite fantasy series, right? So I won't like spoil like how or why she ends up there, but she wakes up and she's a character in this book series that she loves, and she ends up being like one of these wicked characters, and she decides to be really evil because why not? She has nothing to lose. And that premise alone sounds a lot of fun, but this was very meta. This ended up not being the vibe that I was going for. It wasn't sinister enough. There was too much comical relief in it, and I really didn't like that. And I didn't think that it was written very well. So as much as I really wanted to like this, I got to page 100 and I was like, I don't like this. It's not for me. It's just not the vibe. Also, the story, like the actual like world building in this, I found very, very, very confusing. I just wasn't on board because obviously the character ends up in this world that she knows of because she's read the books, but I don't know the world. So I'm told all of this information like very fast, and it doesn't really sink in. And I've seen other people say the same thing where the world building was a little confusing. So I'm glad I'm not the only one because I really found this quite confusing. I didn't really understand the kind of why she was on trial, because she was on trial to be murdered, like the character, not the person, but and obviously she ends up being that character in this fantasy world. So she is put on trial. It just didn't make sense to me. So yeah, I couldn't read it. All right, this is one that I finished. This is Faemfolk by Eliza Chan. Now, I mean, I should probably feel bad for putting this on the list. This is not like a terrible book. It really isn't. But I also didn't enjoy it at the end of the day, and I really struggled with this book. So this is kind of, you're thrown into this world where you have to learn a lot about the world. So there's a lot of world building that needs to be had and taken in and sunk in. There's a lot of different creatures in this world. And there's like sirens, and there's water creatures, and there's humans. From what I can remember, honestly, I think this is the other book that I read in August, and I just don't remember. But I think ultimately I didn't like where the story went because you kind of flip between different POVs, and you end up with these three characters at the end of the book where, you know, they're kind of united in a way, but the story itself, before you get there, is very political and just speaks about classism and just all sorts of stuff in this world that obviously can be commentary on our world. I mean, clearly, because there's people who are living in the slumps, basically, in this world, and then people who are very, very rich and have a wonderful life. So, you know, there's definitely, like, I can appreciate that that's like what the book is doing, and it's speaking about certain things, but ultimately it wasn't a very interesting book in my mind. I did feel quite bored at the end of the day, and I really didn't care about the characters. So I didn't care what happened to them, which is obviously not a good thing when you're writing a book. All right, so I have to talk about this book because this was put up, I think, for the Goodreads choice, and then I saw that the second book was put up this year as a nomination. So I tried to read Assistant to the Villain. Again, don't remember the author's name, but I will put up there. This is another book that I had a physical copy, but I have given it away since. This was atrocious. This was written so poorly. I could not get through it. It's not even the subject matter. I literally could not get through this book because it was written so badly. It felt like it was written by a high schooler. I can't imagine. It definitely didn't seem like a complete book. And there's another one where I think the premise was good. And I think that had it been written in a way that was for adults in a way, because it's not a YA novel. It may be, actually, I don't think it is. It just was written so young and I just did not like it at all. I can't. It's just about, I mean, I don't even need to tell you what it's about. It's about this girl who becomes the assistant to the villain, and how she does is kind of ridiculous. And the things that she ends up doing is just so mundane. It just didn't seem very exciting to me. I didn't read the whole book, so I don't know what happens, but I just could not get through this. So I did end up DNFing this one. Another one that I ended up DNFing, which I was really trying to read the whole thing, is In at the Deep End. Again, I have it right here. I don't remember the author. So this one I picked up, I didn't really know it was going to be about a coming of age like story, or like, you know, in trying to find your sexuality. I really had no idea it was going to be like that. I thought, because in the back of the book, it said like similar to Bridget Jones, like it's kooky, quirky, you know, she ends up sleeping with a bunch of people, she's trying to find herself. And I thought, okay, that sounds like a fun little book to read. But this got very, very dark in a way where I really felt like the main character in the story was put in some really, really bad situations. So she ends up like writing men off completely and realizing that she is a lesbian, right? So she goes off on this adventure of figuring out maybe what type of lesbian she is. Like, it kind of like spells it out for you. Like, she doesn't know what type she is. She doesn't know, you know, how she should be in relationships, how she should be out in the real world, and she's trying to figure it out. And in itself, like, the premise of the book is absolutely fine, but she ends up in the worst toxic relationship ever. Like, it's just so awful, and she's been put in these situations where she's, in my mind, degrading herself. I think eventually the book does kind of reflect on that, but I was not keen on this book. I read a good chunk. I got to like page 200 or so, and then I was like, I can't read this anymore. It got really, really like dark and dingy, and she ended up in these like sex dungeon places, and I'm just like, I don't know if I want to read this. I think that's all I'm going to talk about in this video. There are a few other DNFs, but I don't think they're the worst books in the world. I just think they're books that weren't for me, but they could be for other people. But having said that, all of the books that I've spoken about today, there are people out there who like those books and love them. My opinion should definitely not matter at all, but it just, I did this video last year and it was a lot of fun, so I wanted to do it again. And honestly, I feel like it wasn't that bad. Like, the books that I read this year haven't been that bad. And I will do my best reads of the year next at some point when I can figure out what they are. But there's really not a lot on there, which is so sad. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!